You're listening to Hockey Talk on the Rock
All right, stop.
with Laura and Keith.
It's interesting.
So let's back up a second.
He played absolutely out of his mind.
It made no sense to me.
And now, here are your hosts.
Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome back, Hockey Talk on the Rock. This is attempt number 2 at episode 13.
Episode 13B. For those who don't know, we did try to do this once, but the handy recording button did not get turned on, so we're doing it for fun for a second time.
Yeah, so hopefully it's okay the second time.
Well, I want to point out your sweet retro reverse jersey first thing. It's awesome. I told you look sharp in it. I did expect not to see it yet because it's a big day. Like, I got the Canada on. Canada's playing Finland in like an hour and a half. I kind of thought you might go patriotic, but
No, I said I'd
still
say
sweet.
for a special occasion, and it's New Year's Eve, so here we go. The
There
day.
you go.
Yeah.
No, I like it.
Yeah, so there's been a ton of hockey news, as we said last time, no more of the speculation stuff. Now we're into preparing for the season and getting all the juicy kind of legit stuff out of the way. There was a signing like right before we started. I don't know if you saw that Dubois re-signed in Columbus.
Oh, did he? Bridge deal?
Yeah, 2 years, 5 million. I'm
Yeah.
not sure, because it said 10 million total. So, yeah, it was pretty good.
Kind of saw it going that way. He probably wanted not, but whatever.
Yeah, and it's funny because like this morning they were tweeting out that he wanted to be traded and all this stuff, and then it comes back that he signs. So
Right.
that's actually pretty good for, like, again, like we touched on last time with the Canucks and Pettersson. If the flat cap is kind of driving down the RFA price as well, then I mean Pettersson is a much better player than Dubois, but maybe he won't be making 10 mil next time. Maybe it'll be something a little bit less. So that'd be nice. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to start on touching off again with the realignment of the conferences and divisions. And this is something that I forgot to mention last time, but basically, because all the games this year are going to be in division games, and we have some, unique circumstances like the All-Canadian division, who already a lot of those teams don't like each other. And then, other teams like Tampa and Dallas who are playing in the same division and they just played in the Stanley Cup final. So you could see all these kind of rivalries kicking off. And this is something like, I guess there's 2 points here. I think that fighting in the NHL next year might actually go up after going down for quite a few years, because it's all going to be division games. And again, they're going to hate playing each other. They're playing each other like 9 or 10 times in the Canadian division. So those rivalries are going to be, they're going to be up there. And it kind of brings back the question of if like all the outer division games that currently go on in regular NHL seasons, if that's actually kind of ruining the product. Because, I think back even to like 2006 or whatever, when the Canucks would play, I think each division team like 8 times. And it was like, I remember specifically with Minnesota, because I hated them playing Minnesota because those games were so boring. But they kept playing and they kept playing them. And then you did have these kind of more intense rivalries, which now I feel like as a Canucks fan, I don't really think there are that many rivals of the Canucks right now. And part of that is because they just went through a rebuild, right? But anyway, I think it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up this year.
Yeah, I think I saw the least amount of times a team plays each other is like 7.
Yeah.
And like they're doing it in blocks, sort of like baseball. So it's gonna be like mini playoff series all through the season. I think the biggest one I saw, correct me if you know if I'm wrong, I think it was Anaheim and LA play like 5 games back to back to back. Like, not 5 and 5, but like 5 against each other. You got to think by the end of playing the same team 5 times in a row, even if it's not playoffs, tempers are gonna flare, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be interesting. And they talked about it on the radio quite a bit too. Like, you could ask the Canucks or their fans who their biggest rival is, but you can ask any other team in the league if Vancouver is their biggest rival, and it's hard to say that anyone would pick them.
Yeah.
So it'll be good, like you say, for establishing those rivalries.
Yeah, and the other kind of cool thing out of that is that like there could be two teams. The way that the playoffs are working, right? So you have your division, your interplay or whatever for the first 2 rounds, and then you'll have the semifinals, which could be between like 2 Eastern teams, 2 Western teams, but it could also be like an East and a West depending on how they finish, which means that the Stanley Cup final could be like, Boston, Montreal would be an example. It could be 2 teams in the East, depending on how those semifinals shape up, kind of, which is obviously pretty unique in the present day NHL. So it'll be interesting. See what happens there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's all my conference talk.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, exciting. 13th is coming up pretty quick, and I guess camps started for the Forgotten Seven 3 days ago.
I think today, right? Or maybe it was yesterday.
Was it yesterday? I knew it was a few days before the other teams.
Yeah, they got a couple days extra, and yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. I really can't see those 7 teams improving that much, but yeah. Anyway, real camps start up here in a couple days, so
Yeah, pretty exciting. In the meantime, we've had hockey back since Christmas with the World Juniors.
yeah, it's
Uh,
been very
it's-
enjoyable.
It's been entertaining at certain different levels for sure. The Canada games have been like
Yeah,
at times entertaining, but more or less we were waiting for the big one today, I think, right?
yeah, for sure.
Um,
Did you watch the Sweden and Russia last night?
No, but I heard it was good.
I watched it. It was a very good game. Very good. And it was really nice from a Canucks fan perspective because Podkolzin played very well, but so did Kosmar for the Swedes. So it was like there's 2 Canucks prospects in that game, and they were both very noticeable. So that was good. I mean, I know we talked about him not performing earlier, and I said don't overreact, but I think the same applies when he has a couple good games, right? It's hard. It's really hard to tell with World Juniors.
It is, yeah. Yeah, we talked about in our first attempt at this one how Podkolzin has been kind of absent, and then he's had a couple, or maybe even only one big game, but that's good. And like you say, Kosmar. And from my Philly perspective, like I brought up last time, how Cam York had a noticeable game, but I didn't even mention Bobby Brink, and then since then he's had a pretty big game, or maybe 2, I can't remember. But yeah, as the tournament goes on, you just never know who's going to get in the groove or find the rhythm or whatever.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was definitely a plus, and yeah, like Canada Finland today should be a good game, and hopefully, we see kind of what sort of team Canada actually is with this game, because it's been really hard to tell so far. And then moving on to the quarterfinals, it'll be an interesting matchup no matter what, I think, because it looks like the Czechs are going to finish in 4th in the crossover group. So whoever wins this game will probably play the Czechs, but then the loser is going to play, one of Sweden, Russia, or the US. So these games coming up next are going to get really good. Basically my analysis of the whole situation.
Do you know, have they said the schedule is going to like start off tomorrow right away with the semis?
I kind of assume that tomorrow they'd have a day off, but I don't know.
Okay.
And
I also don't know. I tried to look at the scores and they didn't have anything posted yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. The other thing with the World Juniors is that, like, for Germany, they made the quarterfinals for the first time ever, which is pretty cool. I know they got destroyed by Canada. There was obviously a number of circumstances that went into that, but I do think that's cool for that country. And also, like, Tim Stützle just looks insane right now. Again, you don't want to put too much into it, but he does look like a very good player, so. If he does make the Sens, it'll be pretty fun watching the Ottawa Edmonton games with the 2 Germans kind of going head to head. So it's just something to throw in there.
Right?
Yeah.
3 Germans now, because didn't Edmonton add, who was it, Cahoon or something?
Is he German?
Yeah, wasn't that his thing that him and Draisaitl got?
Yeah, you're totally right. I forgot he was German. Anyway, yeah. The other kind of, I guess, the unfortunate news part of this. So the first one, which is now new since we last talked, is that Jonathan Toews is not going to start the season with the Hawks.
Undisclosed medical issue or whatever.
Yeah, which, is very, obviously you hope is nothing serious for him. Completely out of the blue, didn't see that one coming. But now you think about the effect that Chicago has, which is that they don't have their top two centers with him and Kirby Dach, who got injured playing in the World Juniors. And yeah, they signed Soderberg. But yeah, I really think that Chicago's going to be terrible this year, which I'm really happy about. That's okay.
Totally. And I mean, basically, since that Jonathan Taves news came out, like the Patrick Kane rumors have been just flying around.
Yeah. I mean, if they trade Kane, that will be like, I think the biggest trade that I've experienced as a hockey fan, really. Just like, yeah, that would be pretty big.
It would be pretty big, and it would be the time to do it because they're clearly in rebuild, and with their injuries, they're not going to have a good year.
No.
He's got value still.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick Kane, I really dislike him as a person, but taking that bias aside, I think that he's one of those players that will be effective, into his late 30s because he doesn't play a game that's overly physical and he should still have kind of miles left to play.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, and I mean, you look at his last few seasons, he's always up there for points, like right near the top of the league. He'll get you, in a regular season, somewhere between 80 and 90 points for the next couple of years.
Right.
And if you put him on a good team, he can probably still perform at a pretty high level. So I think that Chicago could get a lot back from him, and, probably time to consider it. But you would think they'd have to approach it very delicately, like only if he wants to go or whatever, because he's done so much for that organization.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Crazy news out of Chicago for sure. And I mean, they have what is it Dylan Strome that they have that's an unsigned RFA still too?
Yeah, I mean they need to sign him now, right?
Yeah, he all of a sudden has some leverage.
Yeah. And kind of on that kind of unexpected news and from teams that I dislike, the other big news from yesterday was Chara. Surprisingly did not re-sign with the Bruins and did not retire, but left and went to Washington for a year. This one I think is one of those signings that, like, for Washington it's a bit weird, but it's 1 year, it's $750K or whatever. I don't think it's like the end of the world. If it was multiple years, it would be bad.
Well, yeah, he's 43.
He's 43, and yeah, evidently the story with it was that Boston told him that they offered him a contract, but they told him that you're not going to play on most nights, and he wasn't interested in that. So I assume that Washington has told him that, he's at least their sixth defenseman.
Right.
But it's they're going to be like Washington, as you said, is going to be old. Like
totally. They're like the new New York Rangers, like picking up old all-stars years gone by and just thinking it's going to work or whatever. You'd have to kind of think that Boston made their decision banking on Chara retiring. They probably let him know, like, okay, we're going to let him know this, and if he doesn't want to do it, he'll just retire. We don't got to worry about it. It doesn't seem like the type of move where they want to see him land anywhere else.
Yeah, I do think they wanted him to retire a Bruin. I think that was their take, but he was like, no, I still want to play hockey. I will say this for Boston. Like, I don't know who, because the quote was that they want to get younger and more skilled or whatever on the blue line, but they don't really have that many good defensive prospects, and they've already lost Torrey Krug. Like, I do find it a bit weird that they didn't give him a contract like that he would play, essentially, because he's gonna be a bottom pairing guy.
Yeah.
Who do you have to fill that spot?
Mm-hmm.
And if you had people that were ready to take that next step, but Boston, I don't know. But evidently on that news, it sounds like Marchand is gonna start the season for Boston.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, I heard that today. So Pasternak will be out for a couple months or a month still, but it sounds like Marchand's going to be ready to go, which is unfortunate because I don't like him. But, Boston is one of those weird teams that I could really see them missing the playoffs, especially because of the division that they play in.
Well, I was just going to say that didn't they slide into Washington's division for this year?
Yeah, that's the thing, too. So they're going to play each other, I think it's like 8 times.
Right.
So that will be obviously something to watch. But yeah, so those are kind of, the two teams that I disliked the most in the 2010s. having some news coming out today. So
Mhm.
yeah.
What did you want to segue into?
Well, I guess kind of we touched on last time the Kucherov injury.
Oh, yeah, Tampa Bay stuff. Yeah.
So within that division, oh no, not that division. I'm so used to them being in Atlantic. We're moving into the Central now. So yeah, Tampa Bay was dealt a pretty big blow because Kucherov is going to be done until the playoffs. The skeptics are all saying that they did it so they could re-sign their RFAs, but I think everyone knows that you'd probably rather have Kucherov in your lineup than, pretty much any of those RFAs. So, but it did enable them to sign Cirelli, to sign Cernak, just straight off after that. And then they made the two trades. They made the one trade with Ottawa to dump some cap. They got rid of Coburn, Paquette, and then a second, and then just took LTIR money with Nilsson and Gabrick. So, I mean, in some ways, you wonder if they knew that Kucherov's injury was pretty serious, and maybe that is why they didn't move on from any of their forwards. Or I know they tried to move on from Johnson, but as you said, it's kind of, in a way, good now that they didn't, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to think this is kind of new news to them because I don't think they would have put Johnson on unconditional waivers if they had known that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how much else you want to touch on it, but
yeah, no, I mean, it's big for Tampa because that was one thing that I feel like we talked about almost every episode was like the Tampa's in the cap crunch, Tampa's trying this, then all of a sudden they got this $9.5 million. Other teams around the league are already like, damn it, he's going to come back to the playoffs and the cap doesn't matter then. They can be way over and blah, blah, blah. Like you say, I think they would rather have him for the full year. But it was kind of amazing how like the Chernak, the Cirelli, the Ruda, the Volkov, the Joseph signings all happened so quickly right after that. And then they did do the smart trade. I think when we tried to do this episode before, we talked about trade winners and participant ribbons, and I gave the winner to Tampa there for clearing the space. And you said, well, I kind of think Ottawa wins. And we agreed that it's probably the closest draw or like win-win that we've covered so far.
Yeah.
Because Tampa clearly needed the cap space, and all they took was dead LTIR money. And Ottawa got a second rounder to pick up, shitty slow Coburn. But like you said, they got Paquette, who will probably work out well for them as a depth winger. So that was a fun one. And I guess it ultimately spells the end of Marian Gabrick for all we know.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like Nelson too. He's still been having problems from a concussion, and I doubt he plays again personally. So,
right.
I actually quite liked Nelson when he played for the Canucks. I thought he was a decent goalie for that time, which was pretty rough. But he was all right, and then Markstrom really emerged as the starter.
And that could have gone either way, really. At the time.
Yeah. At the time, it felt like, and when he was in Edmonton, he wasn't that bad either. So it's too bad for him if this is the end. And obviously, Gabrick had a pretty good career. So.
Yeah. So just before we move on from that trade, I did want to touch on what we talked about before in terms of looking at Ottawa's defense after this trade.
Yes.
And you look at Shabbat and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. And then right after that, it's like Zaitsev, Goodbranson, Coburn, Mike Riley, and what is it, Josh Brown?
Josh Brown, yeah.
And it's like, that's terrible. Like, it's not, like, they're recognizable names, but Coburn's way past his prime. Goodbranson didn't really have a prime. Like, Zaitsev's known for how slow he is, so I think it's going to be frustrating for their young forwards this year because their defense is going to be so historically slow and bad, and it'll be tough on Matt Murray.
Yeah. What I wonder is if they're going to try to move someone. I don't know how they move someone because I think almost all those contracts are not movable, but they do have the guy they picked up from Vegas.
Brasser?
Yeah. And I know he didn't have a great season last year, but you got to think that they're going to give him some playing time. Like, above, I'd say, at least 3 of those guys.
Think so?
I don't know. I like if it was me, like this is kind of what I'm saying with the Boston thing. Like if Boston had a player like Brandstrom, then okay, like let him play. And Chicago, that Ottawa's gonna have a tough year, especially at moving the puck out of their own end, as you say. And Brownstrom's a pretty good puck moving defenseman by all scouting reports. I don't know. I'd probably let him try it out over those other players, but I don't know.
Yeah, I literally just had this discussion like 2 days ago with a friend, and it was kind of like, yeah, he's probably going to be better than those guys, but like, how badly do you want one of those guys to be his defensive partner?
That's
You know?
true too. I don't know. I really don't know what's gonna happen with the Sens. I feel like they're gonna be a fascinating team to watch for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
I think there are gonna be some high scoring games with the Sens. But the other trade with the Senators, I've actually flip flopped my mind on. I had given them the win, but then after Arizona went out and re-signed, or not re-signed, but signed Brassard, they're essentially getting the same player that they had in Stepan at this point of his career. And then
Right.
they picked up the second for trading Stepan, and they got Brassard for cheaper. So
How much was Boussard? I missed how much.
I think it's 750, but it might have been a bit more. Let me double check.
And that was a 1 year deal?
Yeah.
See, yeah. Before that happened, I gave the win to Arizona.
Yeah.
And I would still give it to them
Yeah.
because I just felt like even with no contingency plan, a second round pick for Stepan was just an overpayment. And then we talked about in episode 13, attempt one, how the Ottawa's centers are White and Isamov and Tierney, and Stepan kind of solidifies their, group of second line and third line centers that they already have. So it makes sense for them to throw him in there because they don't have anyone superstar, but maybe he'll push one of those guys up. But yeah, it just feels like a lot to give up.
It
But
was
maybe the money what's that, sorry?
It was 1.2 million.
Okay, so Arizona saved like 4 plus.
Yeah.
Or 5 plus or something, right?
And yeah, I think that you got to think that they'll give probably Barrett Hayton a chance at being that second line center in Arizona. But
what's the other one? Is it Dvorak's kid?
Dvorak, yeah.
And he's the other center, right?
Yeah. And those I assume will be their top two, and then you have Brassard as the third line center, and he can probably play some second line center if they need to. I mean, he was okay with the Islanders, but he's not, fantastic. And I have a feeling with Arizona, he's probably going to struggle.
Yeah.
But that team is also going to be a dumpster fire. So, it is what it is. They got nice jerseys, but that's about it.
They have opinionally divided jerseys. We'll go with it. Before we start kicking into more signings, I just want to quickly touch on the Kovalchuk back to Russia thing. I still haven't seen how much he signed for, but I just see it was a 2-year deal. Assuming more money than he was going to get here. Ultimately, probably should have never signed with LA when he came back. I enjoyed his little time in Montreal. It was nice that they sent him over to Washington for a kick at the can with Ovi, and it's too bad that really went over like a lead balloon kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like he's probably one of those guys that will regret leaving to go play in the K when he did.
Yep.
But it's kind of like what you're saying with Nelson there. If this is the end, it's a sad way to go.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching Kovalchuk play, especially like when he was in his prime. Atlanta, and then a bit in New Jersey there when he took them to the Cup final. I thought he was always a very fascinating player to watch. His shot was so good. And then when he left for Russia, I remember being really bummed out. And he came back, and it was kind of meh until the Montreal part. And then, it would have been really fun, I think, to see him and Ovi play out that end of that regular season that never happened. So in that way, it's too bad. But, he was, at this point, he's more of a KHLer than an NHLer. And so I kind of understand, I guess, why he would go back if he's not going to get the role that he wants in the NHL. But
Yeah.
it's too bad for fans.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think there's only been 2 PTOs still.
Yeah.
Am I right there?
I think
So yeah, quickly, because we did touch on Henrik Lundqvist before, right?
Yes.
In an actual filmed episode.
I don't think so. Did we? I don't remember. I thought we talked about it last time.
In our non-recorded one.
In our non-recorded, yeah.
Okay, well, Henrik Lundqvist, poor guy, when, like you said last time, went for open heart surgery, and then a week prior to that or whatever it was, put out a statement saying he can't play due to his health, which is really too bad because that it seems like we're on a theme here of if this is the swan song, that really sucks. Because it would have been weird to see him play in Washington, but I was happy to see him continue to play rather than be bought out and retire.
Yep.
But since he is done and he left, the Capitals, everyone was wondering, are they going to use Phoenix Copley or the other young goalie who I can never remember his name of? Or are they going to try to attract one of the 4 available goalies who are Jimmy Howard, Corey Snyder, Ryan Miller, or Craig Anderson? And ultimately, Craig Anderson got a PTO. I would be surprised if he doesn't turn that into a contract. Good for him. Happy for him to continue his career, hopefully.
Yes.
On the note of the other goalies that they were talking about, I think we discussed last time very quickly about how we think Jimmy Howard might be done.
Yeah.
I don't see Jimmy making it back to the NHL at this point. We talked about Corey Snyder and how it seems like we both hope that he has a future still, and we quickly discussed the Islanders apparently having these handshake deals in place with him and Andy Green and who was it, Matt Martin, waiting to sign Barzell, and then they're going to sign them. So hopefully Snides has something in place there.
Yes.
And then, of course, the last one, most importantly, big news, Ryan Miller signing for 1 year, $1 million with Anaheim. That's super important because now I got 2 out of 16 right on the goalie carousel predictions we made, tying you, moving me from the loss column up and down into the tie column.
Yeah.
Up to the tie column.
Up to the tie, let's say.
And just tell me, moving from the assured victory and now having a tie, are you devastated?
I'm pretty heartbroken. As I said last time, I was pretty sure that I was going to lose that, especially after they said that you needed the 3 goalies in camp, or not in camp, on your roster. And I was thinking to myself, I bet you Ryan Miller gives it one more kick at the can. And here we go.
I've been trying to think who I got right with my other one. Because I remember you got Thomas Greiss right. And I was like, I can't remember who else we got right.
It was one of the ones was it Leonard of Vegas?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
One of the easy ones.
Yeah.
There we go. We're super smart.
Yeah. No, pretty hard to top us.
So that was my greatest achievement of the week, probably. And then on top of that, I mean, I guess I could stick with the goalies and just quickly touch on Mackenzie Blackwood getting his 3 years, $2.8 million in New Jersey. I talked quickly before about how with Vancouver and Demko and Philadelphia with Carter Hart, that seems like a pretty sweet deal.
Yes.
Seems like goalies kind of are more common to bridge. I was talking to a friend recently who has Hart in his keeper pool, and he's like, oh, I want to keep him, but I don't know what the next contract's going to look like. And I was like, well, Binnington just re-signed, and he went to All-Star pretty quickly, and it was only $4 million per. So I like the Blackwood deal because it makes it seem like the Demko and the Hart deals in the future won't be extremely painful for our respective teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really nice deal. And, Blackwood played really well for New Jersey after kind of solidifying that spot as the number 1 goalie. And if there's anything kind of positive out of New Jersey, I think their goaltending situation this year is going to be pretty good with Blackwood and then Crawford as the backup. I think that's a pretty decent pair. But obviously the rest of the team is, lacking. Yeah. But I think they have some good options in net. So, yeah. And if Demko signs anything around there, I think the Canucks will be pretty happy. So.
Totally.
Yeah. I guess the last one, this is what I mentioned last time, was the Andrew Hammond going to Minnesota.
Oh, right, the goalies. Yeah.
And that's one that I didn't really understand. I think if I was Minnesota at that point, I definitely would have touched base with Anderson first, but maybe he wasn't interested in going.
Right.
But yeah, and that's because of the injury to Stalock.
Yeah. So Talbot and Hammond, the
Yeah.
hamburger.
He's back.
Yeah.
It's like he never left.
They're making me regret my putting them in the top 4 in whatever division they're in. Pacific, I guess.
The Pacific, I mean, I still think Minnesota could make it because the Pacific is so weak outside of the top 3 teams.
Yeah.
But that goaltending duo combined with their center depth for me is like, yeah, no. Mind you, I picked San Jose to make it, and I'm just banking on the fact that they outscored their problems in net. But I think it's probably between those 2 teams. Maybe Arizona if their goaltending leads them there, but yeah. And then I guess the kind of other important PTO news was the Mike Hoffman signing a
over that.
in St. Louis.
Right.
And I'm more skeptical about this than you. I think I read this as them just trying to get around the cap. And they're waiting to put their Tarasenko and Steen on LTIR, and then they'll give Hoffman a pretty decent deal. Whereas I think you read it as he's still negotiating with other teams, which he could.
Well, sort of, right? As soon as Steen announced he was retiring, I think it was within an hour or whatever, I said to you, I was like, I bet you Hoffman ends up in St. Louis now when they got that money. Didn't I hear that Ferland in Vancouver got officially put on LTIR today?
So they didn't put him on LTIR, but he's not attending camp, so I assume he's going to be on LTIR.
Okay, so that movement's going to happen pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming we'll find out the Hoffman thing pretty soon. I do still think he's going to end up in St. Louis with that money becoming available, but like I said in the non-recorded episode, that it seems like there's still interest from other teams, and it almost like there's suggestion that it's almost like a negotiating tactic. Like, well, St. Louis is signing me to a PTO, and they've got this money, so if you want me, you're gonna have to throw more or a better term or whatever. So you never know. He could end up somewhere else still, but I would put my money on St. Louis.
Yeah, I think he's going to St. Louis. I'd be shocked if he signs anywhere else at this stage. And I mean, that's a pretty good place for Hoffman. He'll have good opportunity there. And with a winning team, which is something he hasn't really, I mean, when he was in Ottawa, they were good, right? But outside of that, he hasn't played on a lot of competing teams. So for him, I think it's a pretty good place. And I think for the team, it's pretty good. And I think St. Louis is going to have a good year this year. The only question mark for me would be, again, the goaltending, just because Binnington looked very human in the playoffs. And then their backup is now Husso, who has never played a regular season NHL game.
Right.
So unless they sign another goalie. At this point, I don't know who it would be. But, yeah.
Jimmy Howard on a PTO. You never know.
Jimmy Howard, like I said, in a regular season, I'd be like, there's no way anyone signs him. But again, because there of people having to carry the 3 goalies, I think that there might be a chance he does sign somewhere. He might not play a game, but I could maybe see that. But yeah, I mean, St. Louis will have a good year. I think they're a team to watch.
Mm-hmm.
The other, I guess, fun news was the my boy. It's not really my boy, but Corey Perry signing with the Habs.
Oh yeah.
And they also picked up Frolik. And I like both of those moves. I think for their, Corey Perry was very, like, basically invisible during the regular season for Dallas, and then in the playoffs played a big role. So I think for Montreal to sign Corey Perry, they're banking on the fact that they're going to make the playoffs. And basically Corey Perry can just chill until he makes the playoffs, and then that's when, they're looking for his contribution. I think he said he always wanted to play for a Canadian team and that the Habs actually were his favorite team growing up, so that's nice for him. But I like the move. I mean, I like for Leak as well. Bottom 6 kind of moves for the Habs, I think.
Yeah, no, I think they're both good moves that'll pay off for the cost of doing business or whatever.
Yeah.
And it makes me feel good about my pick for or Montreal being number one in the Canada division.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm banking very heavily on the Price Allen combo to make that happen.
Yeah, I think they'll be better, but I don't know how much better. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Everybody has Toronto number one or number two, but I just don't know about their goaltending.
Hey, I don't have them one or two. I have different controversial picks. I don't know. Anyway, but with Edmonton kind of going there, as you said last time, Clefbaum went on injured reserve, or he's not going to be available for the season. And the Oilers made a very Oilers move and went out and signed Slater Cuckoo. I think
Right.
there's a lot of other defensemen that are still out there, namely two, that would have made more sense for them, being Hamonic and Vatanen. But they signed Cuckoo. And I mean, who knows? Maybe they did talk to those free agents and they didn't want to come to Edmonton. But yeah.
I mean, they've been talking about Vatanen on the Vancouver radio a little bit because I guess Vancouver's kicking tires now. But it sounds like their biggest thing is they want at least a 2-year deal, whereas everyone's only offering 1-year deals.
Okay.
So that might have been something for Edmonton. But yeah, I mean, what do you know about Madison Bowie?
Madison Bowie? Very little. I remember he played on the World Junior team. That's about all I remember about him.
Okay, because yeah, it was like I hadn't heard that name in a long, long time, and I think it was only today, maybe yesterday as well. But all of a sudden, it was like, well, Madison Bowie could be a type of player that Vancouver goes out and gets, and I was like, what? Where's that coming from? Like, they already have young prospects that they wanted, 4 guys competing for these 2 spots. Why would they do that? It was one that kind of put me off.
I mean, if the Canucks, like, if Ferland is going on LTIR and they go out and they sign one more, like, even depth defenseman, like someone essentially to replace Stetcher, I would be totally sold on the Canucks this year. Like, in this division. Because if you think
if it was like if they went out and got Hammock on a 1-year, $2 million deal or something,
yeah, I'd be totally sold on them. Yeah.
If they went out and got Madison Bowie on a 1-year league minimum, I would be like, that's not news.
No, exactly. I agree. But I think there are still some guys out there, and if they get that flexibility with the cap, they got to do it. They got to do it soon so they can have them for the beginning of the season. But I did hear on the news today that they're not making the NHL players complete the 14-day quarantine. So
right, there's an exemption, it's a 7-day thing.
Okay, it's 7. So there's a bit of time, and that kind of kicks it back to what I started off talking about last time, with the idea that the Canadian division is going to be kind of set in the sense that they're not going to be making trades, but maybe if it is 7 days instead of 14 to quarantine, maybe then the Canadian teams will be more likely to trade players with America.
That'll make a humongous difference, right? Because last time we're like, what are they going to do? We're trying to trade with American teams 2 weeks before the deadline, so then at the deadline they can get their guy. Or like 2 weeks doesn't seem 2 weeks doesn't seem like much, but when you're playing a game every 2 nights for the whole season, it's 7 games right there. That's pretty much an eighth of the season.
Yeah. And then I guess kind of the last team that I want to touch on is Nashville making those couple of signings. They won the Eric Howla sweepskates and the Michael Granlund sweepskates, which, I mean, Granlund played for them last year. I think that both those guys will fit in well with Nashville. Obviously, Granlund had a down year last year, but he kind of banking on him to bounce back a little bit. And I think Eric Howla will be a good, second or third line center for them, however they want to use him.
Yeah, Granlund's a centerman too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense that they did this because it seemed like their offense was their lethargic part. Like, Nashville's been historically offensively stunted, right? And they've been so reliant on their defense, but then they've kind of built up where a couple of years ago they made the cup final. Their offense seemed to be pretty good, but last year it was like every guy they were banking on to have a good offensive year on the offense just had an off year or whatever. So you saw it throughout the offseason when like They bought out Turris, right?
Yep.
That's one of their top 3 centermen. Then they traded Benino to Minnesota for Kunin, who is supposedly a centerman, but I think he was playing wing
Yeah.
in Minnesota. So it was obvious that like they picked out their centers as kind of like this is where we really need to reshuffle the deck. And so now that they've got Turris and Bonino out the door,
yeah.
and Granlund stuck around, and Holla in the door, and Kunin as a new winger for one of those guys, you'd think it feels like they've done a decent amount to reshuffle the cards of the deck. Like obviously they weren't going to do anything with Matt Duchene. He's only 1 year in. They do the bank out or whatever, but.
And I think that Duchene will have a better year this year. I don't think he'll be as bad. He's one of those guys that's really hot or cold.
See, I think Nashville is going to stagnate overall.
Yeah.
I think their offense is going to be significantly better this year than it was last year because it was an off year. But I think Rene is going to take a step back in net, and I don't know
about Saros.
I mean, I've heard forever that he's like just waiting to take over for Rene, but the fact that it hasn't happened sooner makes me wonder.
Yeah, I don't know about Minnesota, Nashville either. I picked them to miss the playoffs. I could see them making it. They're one of those teams that's like very borderline. I agree with you. I think their offense will be better. I'm also not completely sold on their goaltending, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I mean, they've got some good offensive weapons there, right? Like they do have Forsberg and Arvidsson, who both can score goals. So if they figure out someone to pass the puck to those guys, then they should be okay offensively.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I only have one more that we haven't covered. Well, I'm looking forward. I did have Casey Middlestat. We talked about very quickly re-signing Buffalo for less than what we thought, but probably like because he hasn't developed the way that anybody really thought he was going to. He was a top 10 draft pick, was he, or close to?
Yeah, I think he was 7. I think he was like a couple picks after Patterson.
Right. Yeah. So, and he was like top scorer of the World Juniors, but like as we talked about earlier this episode, like the World Juniors is sometimes so
hard to
so hard to be able to determine what's going to come of that. So yeah, Middlestat, I mean, they've got a different looking forward group in Buffalo a little bit, sort of. So maybe
like you got to think that Dylan Cousins is going to try and break his way in this year, I would think, to that lineup. And ideally, I think they're hoping for him to be their second line center if Middlestat doesn't pan out. So I'd say this is kind of Middlestat's last chance to solidify that he can be a second line center in the NHL.
Yeah. This year's Jesse Puljujarvi almost, it kind of feels like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's so many guys from around those years, right? Like you think about, oh yeah, that's the other thing I really wanted to quickly touch on was LA signing Athanasiou.
Oh yeah, right. That was a new one too.
Because I was gonna bring up the Elias Anderson trade there. But it just seems like LA has so many young or like prospect forwards that are gonna try and make that team like so you have the Elias Anderson who they got, then you just got Athanasiou who's a bit older, and he's one of those players that I would say is also a bit of a project. Like he's got so much potential when you watch him play, well, he's so much speed and you want him to put in more points, but he's never really done it. Elias Anderson also project. And then you have Velarde, who should be ready to make that team. He played a bit for them at the end of last season, and he was really good. But you also have like Kaliev, who's been playing for the U.S. in the World Juniors. And then they have Turcotte, who's been playing for the World Juniors team. Byfield, I mean, obviously not all those guys are going to make the team. But you still have, you know, your
Kupari as well.
Who, sorry?
They got Kupari too, like Rasmus Kupari. He was another first round pick.
Yeah, so I don't know. Like, it's going to be fascinating to see what LA does with their forwards, and then I have no idea who they're going to have play defense. I know, you know, obviously they have Doughty, and I think Kale Clegg is probably going to make the team this year, but those are like the 2 players I could name on their back.
I feel like LA is going to desperately try to be like the Columbus of a half a decade ago or whatever, where they're going to have good young forwards and need defense and find a partner like, the Nashville Jones for Johansson swap. Where
Right.
they're going to be like, we have so many good young forwards. We need to find a team who has good young D and make the one for one type of deal. Not saying it's going to happen because defense are harder to come by, but
Yeah.
you never know.
Well, very
There's
weird.
two more quick things, but a third quick thing. The Patrick Laine rumors don't die, and to Philadelphia don't die either.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is it going to happen?
I don't see why Winnipeg would trade him this year after signing Paul Stastny. I still don't get it. Like,
Yeah.
what their incentive would be. And now the other thing with Winnipeg is the Jack Roslovic has said he wants a trade. So, that's another one of their wingers. Or I guess he plays center. No, he's a winger.
He's a center.
Okay, centerman, yeah. But another one of their young forwards who says he wants to change the scenery. So it kind of makes you wonder, is it a Winnipeg thing? Like they don't want to live in Winnipeg. But I know Patrick Laine said he didn't mind the cold or whatever when he got drafted there. Or if it's just they're not getting that opportunity to develop to what they feel like they can develop to. So I don't know. It's an interesting situation to monitor when you have two young guys asking for a trade on the same team.
Yeah. I know they're both similar from what I've read in terms of Laine wants to be guaranteed, top power play, top line unit. And like Maurice won't do it.
Yeah.
And Roslovic is similar, not saying he wants top line or top power play, but he does want to be elevated. And I think when they signed Stastny, he probably felt like he was ready to make that jump, which I don't think he would have been.
No.
But he obviously wants an opportunity to move up too, and he doesn't see it happening there. So too bad. The only reason I can see it happening is because they do need defense.
They do.
They need a top four for sure. And Philly makes sense in terms of why it keeps coming up because they have
top four defense.
They have a surplus for sure.
Yeah, kind of on that note too. I don't know if you saw the thing about Samuel Morin playing forward for the Flyers.
I didn't.
Yeah, evidently they've announced he's gonna play like left wing instead of defense this year.
Okay. I kind of wondered because forever he was developing at the same time as Provorov and Hag and Sanheim, but Provorov was so good he went straight up, right?
Yeah.
And then he was kind of always caught battling those other two, and they both passed him by with injuries because he got hurt a couple times, and so it was kind of always like, well, like he's not bad, and it's not like he's been beat out by shady players. Like he got beat out by good players. So yeah, I was always kind of wondering what the plan was with Morin because they have a surplus D and they are definitely short on wingers. So
yeah, and I mean it's kind of a nice safety net to have, right? Like for Philly, if they're playing in a game and one of their defensemen gets hurt, then you can always drop him back down to D because it's easier to play with like less forwards and less D-men, right?
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see. It doesn't happen a lot, right? Where you're a professional player and you change positions, but it is easier to play wing than it is to play defense in general. So,
right.
Well, it'll be interesting to see that one.
There will be. That's cool news. I like that. Last one. I'll throw at you before I start shaking the screen and get ready for the game. Duclair, Florida, 1.7 mil. We talked about great deal, great signing. You were saying that he seemed to want to go there because he's going to be able to play with either Barkov or Huberdeau, and like you said, for a young, talented, speedy winger, like that's a pretty opportune situation to be in, even though he seems to take quite a bit less money than we both thought he would have got.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's a good signing. Puts him back with Quenneville as the coach, so he's got some familiarity there. And then that opportunity to play with one of those two centermen is pretty unique, and no state tax.
No state tax plays a big factor. All right, well, that's what I got. I'm going to try to get in a somewhat dog walk before Canada-Finland here in half an hour. So keep on rocking in the free world and do.
Okay.
So we'll talk to you later this evening for New Year's and talk on the rock. And Go Canada! Woo!